We do have our county manager to open up for comments, but we did ask, and I was interacting with the property appraiser, to give us some insight, maybe some additional explanation. I think we were all kind of surprised at what we received, and I thought it might help us at least with some understanding of what we are dealing with right now and maybe what July might bring. But I'll turn it over to our county manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we get into the capital improvement and major maintenance, just real quick, the board did give us direction at the last, gave us direction at the last workshop to come back with a balanced budget. We're working towards that. Today we're going to be talking about the major maintenance and capital and where we are, and also provide some suggestions of how we move forward as we look at specifically CIP. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the property appraiser.
Good afternoon, Matt. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you, board and team. So I went back to the office after getting asked this morning and just threw a few slides together, but I'm glad to go into as much depth as y'all have questions about. But I thought it would be good just to start off to reorient us where we are first in the calendar and the context as well of the county. The tax roll obviously is based on January 1st. That's the date of value for all of the conclusions that are developed. March 1st is the exemptions deadline, although we at our office will extend that courtesy all the way through the close of the VAB deadline into September with good cause. We are here because of the June 1st estimate. That number gets certified by July 1st, and that's the number on July 1st that's used to develop the DR 420. That's the form that develops the rolled back rate that you'll receive as the target. Then for our purposes in our office, we have to issue the trim notice that gathers up all of the maximum proposed millages from all of the taxing authorities. That goes out on or before August 24th, and that starts the 25-day clock for property owners to file a petition with the Value Adjustment Board. On or before October 10th, we have to get all of the final adopted millages from the taxing authorities, assemble that together with the roll, hand that off to the tax collector, who then has to issue tax bills by November 1st. And of course, we're in the VAB cycle that needs to hopefully, and so far we haven't broken this deadline, get wrapped up before June 1st of the following year. That has been we've been a little bit piled on the last 2 years with the hurricane workload volume, about a 30 to 40% increase in petitions as a result of, well, frankly, I think both valuations and the hurricane. Lee County, 550,000 parcels roughly, makes us one of the highest parcel count jurisdictions in the country. Roughly half of that is homestead property, and then inside of that you have about 20,000 plus or minus commercial properties, and we still have about 4,000 agricultural accounts. So this is the information that the Department of Revenue provides to all of the counties. This came to us about a week and a half ago at this point, and this is their observations. The process is a little bit of a give and take between our office and the Department of Revenue, but they believe that in these lines, single-family condo, mobile home, and then Stratum 1 is all of your residential combined, that they are observing a significant year-over-year decrease. What I'll just point out, a little bit of challenge, Stratum 4 is the land. I would say that we disagree with their conclusions in both extremes, both in an appreciation on the land side of 11% and perhaps a little too strong on several of these residential items. But that at least sets the stage of what Department of Revenue is looking at. Now, and that's just objectively. They're looking at properties the year before, properties this year, what they're observing in the sales data. That doesn't mean that that's going to necessarily correlate to where we conclude with the tax roll, because there's so many more moving parts. So the numbers that you received this weekend, this is the summary table here. It shows the final for 2024 from the VAB meeting a few weeks ago, has our July 1 estimate in each of these categories, the change, and then as a percentage. And down here, you have the new construction. This is the area where you're going to have, confusion wouldn't be the word for it, but the most differing things all combined in one, because the way that the report is developed and recognized by DOR, new construction includes not only truly new construction, things that have just been built in the last year, but also everything that is coming back on the tax roll. So any of your homes, businesses, any of the structures that were damaged in the hurricanes, and so for the preceding 1, 2, 3 years, we have had those structure values zeroed out on the roll. Their land value was still included, but their structure value was zeroed out. As those have come back on each January 1st, those get bundled up in the just value. And you can see how that's captured in the difference between that just value and the taxable value, considering that only about half is being realized on taxable value. That gives you an appreciation of how much of that new construction is actually homestead or prior owned, subject to a 10 cap that's coming back in. But nonetheless, we are talking about $4.5 billion in additional taxable value. And when you think about that rollback rate and the DR 420, this is the value that doesn't get included. So when they develop the formula that develops the rollback rate, essentially it attempts to take last year's tax roll, ignore everything that's truly new, and just adjust the millage based on appreciation, inflation, whatever dynamic has happened. So true new construction is excluded from that. That is always an amount of taxable value that you as the taxing authority will have available to you beyond that rollback rate calculation. But I think it's important to put into context just where this is, setting aside my thoughts and conclusions about what's happening in the market in general. Just looking back, we have experienced obviously some pretty historically unbelievable increases in property value and taxable value over the last 3 years. Just in my single term, first term as property appraiser, we went from $133 billion in just and $96 billion in taxable up to last year's $219. I mean, we added roughly $90 billion in just value over that 4-year period, despite the hurricanes and despite the headwinds. And of course, we can attribute that broadly to two things. One is inflation. Inflation has changed the nature of value. To what extent that is a permanent artifact with us, that is the debate, right? But we know, those of us that say we're around in the last major inflation spike in the 1970s, there was no going back, right? By 1980, you weren't going to find any property for the price point that you were looking at it in 1970. The fundamental price point had changed in a way that had nothing to do with demand and supply at all. But at that same time that we're going through historic inflation, we also had the strongest demand spike that we've experienced at least in 20 years, right? We had people moving here from every single corner of the country to Florida and to Lee County in particular. They came and they drove demand to such a height that we saw supply. So taking a step back, traditionally you view a healthy market as demonstrating being in balance when it takes somewhere between 3 to 6 months from a list to a sale occurring, right? So if you go back, and we've really struggled to find that sweet spot again for a while. We've really experienced both extremes. But if you look at the historic analysis, 3 to 6 months is a standard marketing time. At the height of the COVID demand, less than a week was a standard marketing time. I mean, that gives you a perspective of how far out of balance the demand was versus the supply. And even as we sit here today in spring of 2025, in most of these property types, you're still under 3 months of marketing time. Particularly if you're appropriately priced. I mean, I'm still seeing properties listed and sold in under 2 weeks. So if you take that, it's really kind of hard to reconcile, and it is very confusing, and I'm not going to say that I can give you the exact answer of what is happening this moment or what that's going to look like once we round out this next year and we look into 2026. But it is it is a very interesting time in real estate to be underselling it, let's say. Now, what does that mean as a practical effect for y'all as you prepare your budget? It does mean we've concluded here a taxable increase of 4.84%, but it shouldn't go unnoticed that we did show a decrease in the just value. And so while I think the DOR's numbers are a little stronger than we're going to conclude, I think particularly anyone that's interacting in the market would say that in the condo sector, particularly, you've seen a lot of softness. It would not surprise me if somebody came and said that condos have gone down by 10% year over year, both as a result of demand, but also bigger challenges that are happening in the condo market. The marketability of condos has, particularly the older condos, has become more of a challenge for two reasons. One, it would have happened probably anyway when you think about the aging effect that we're running into. Condo law was adopted in Florida, I want to say 64, 66, something like that. So our oldest condo buildings are 60 years old. If these were not put into condo ownership, these would be, if they were owned as an apartment building or a hotel, these would probably be prime candidates for redevelopment on their own regardless. So this effect was going to start developing anyway in terms of demand. You think about physical depreciation, you're thinking about functional obsolescence, right? Those oldest condo buildings may only have a single bath on average or 1.5 bath. That's just not where the market demand is. And what complicates that further, obviously, is it's not a single ownership structure. It's a fractional interest structure, so you're going to have 80 or 100 unit owners that all have to get together and decide what to do with those. You layer onto that reality that was coming as a result of age, the changes to the law that the legislature made following the Surfside collapse 3 years ago. And so it is a pretty regular, I've got an email in my inbox right now from a condo owner in South Fort Myers who's very upset because he thinks we overvalued his property when he considers the substantial assessments that they're facing for a 50-year-old condo structure in order to maintain their compliance with the law now in terms of their long-term maintenance. So if I were looking again at those, the big drivers in the residential sector, the condos really do have the most challenge, but I think most of that is probably focused in the oldest properties. Let me stop there and ask questions that y'all have, and then I've got a couple other slides. Just, I assume you probably have some questions as to what I think might be happening in the future, so I threw a couple other slides in as well.
Questions?
Chairman, if I could. So could you just kind of in plain English terms help us understand how the just value, which is essentially like the market value, is that the right way to look at it? How can that go down but the taxable value go up?
That's a great question. So just value under Florida law is market value. What distinguishes it from the way we will talk about the concept of market value just out on the street is just value must exclude any non-real estate consideration, right? So automatically, most transactions include a commission for a broker. That has to be deducted or extracted from the data set, so that our just value should reflect purely the consideration purely for the real estate and no non-real estate components. Now, how can those two numbers diverge? That is a baked-in feature of the recapture. So both Save Our Homes, which has effectively a 3% annual cap, and then all of your non-homestead properties that are now under a 10 cap, they will continue to accrue or appreciate on the taxable line as long as their assessed value does not exceed the just value, right? So if you go through a scenario like we did in 09 and 10, where just value falls below even the capped assessed, then the property owner will receive the benefit of having their assessed value follow where the market goes. But for the time being, when you look at the gap we have there, $211 billion in just value and $167 billion in assessed value, that's the 4.85%, essentially that's your blended result of all of those 3 caps, all those 10 caps, and the true new construction of $4 billion or so wrapped in moving forward in time. And those will continue to potentially converge. Maybe they won't converge. I don't think we'd like to see that necessarily. But the assessed value, which then results in the taxable value, because remember, the taxable is after you take out all the $50,000 homestead. So that's how you get to the actual taxable number that results in what you will be looking at for determining your millage needs at the $144 billion. So that gives you, just roughly that's going to be $23 billion in direct homestead benefit. Although again, that's going to also be a blend of all of your charitable exemptions, all of your school property, all of your hospital property, everything that's also getting an additional zero value in the net end of it all.
I had a question. Matt, thank you for the information and everything. Thanks for providing more detailed information. So something, we all learn something every day. So I know I've talked to your staff in the past, and I mentioned to you before the meeting, there's some flexibility for the state of Florida, for the power appraisers to have some move the needle based upon the value. Is it the just value or the assessed value or the taxable value? You have a discretionary there for that within the market.
So to the point that will be most useful for you as a commissioner, the taxable and assessed don't have any discretion. They're based on the dynamic I just described for Commissioner Hammond. They really are driven by the 3% or the 10% recapture. So whatever last year's was, they're going to move forward. The only part of that conclusion that isn't subject to that are all of your new property owners. So anybody that didn't have a pre-existing homestead, anybody that bought brand new a commercial property in 2024, they're starting at just value in year one. This is their year one, and then they will be capped moving forward. So to the extent that there's any discretionary impact that could exist in the assessed and taxable, it would be completely limited to just those people that purchased in 2024 and are starting at year one. Now, to the bigger question of how you build a mass appraisal tax roll, discretion is probably not the right word for it. When you develop any kind of mass model, and we'll go back to our high school math class, and we remember you got an ideal bell curve, and you're going to have properties on both ends at both tails that are least like the majority of the set. Our obligation is to deliver an equitable distribution. And so that does mean that there is some variance, right, the standard deviations between the tails where you can fall and be defensible. Our goal, and we did as we usually have, we're right at the midpoint of the bell curve. What that means as a practical matter is there's a potential to be off by greater extent at both ends of the tail, both the highest end properties and the lowest end properties. And so we traditionally have not been overly aggressive because if you do that, that means you're going to definitely overassess the low end of the tail. And even if you are trying to chase the top end of the tail, you're going to create a significantly higher workload, and probably not at the end of the day, once VAB is over, really result in any negligible gain in terms of value.
Again, I was just asking because I know throughout the year this is always going to come up in different ways. Is the property owner a single-family homeowner, don't own anything else, so obviously I'm concerned about my values, of my tax value. As a conservative, I want to keep my taxes down, but also if that's the only thing I own, I want my values to continue to grow up. That's my future, my retirement. But also from us, from a policy standpoint, as we get for the next year or two with the decreases, I'm going to ask you about, you haven't covered the cities, how much of a decrease they're seeing. We're going to constantly get, over the 6 cities, we're going to constantly get asked for projects, partnerships. We've got the city of Cape Coral, they want to increase the $600 fee to their residents because they don't get TDC money. You got the city of Sanborn wanting dredging money. You got all these different cities wanting money. They want kayak hikes and parks. They want all this stuff, but at the end of the day, if we don't have the revenue, we're having to make cuts. We're going to have that money to fund projects we already have on our priority list, like stormwater drainage, kayak preserve, whatever it may be, road projects we have to cut back, and that's something we're going to have to face over the next couple of years with the decrease of value, is when these projects we don't have the money to fund these projects, and that's what's frustrating. So. want to keep it down as far as values, as far as the taxes. We want to reduce taxes. We've always been done that. But at the end of the day, we can't fund these projects. So that's going to be the hardship we have to deal with.
Mr. Chair, if you want me to move, that probably is a good jump-off point to kind of my thoughts in the future.
If I may? Thank you. I don't mean to belabor anything, but trying to understand this in a nutshell. So appreciate your conversation, and you focused in on just assessed taxable. New construction, so, when I look at the total just and then the total assessed and the taxable, I look at it and say, okay, it's 20-30% decrease. Help me understand the new construction piece, because you have adjusted and you have a taxable that seem to be almost 50% different. So they seem to be significantly different than your top line numbers. So I'm trying to understand that. And then furthermore, which may be a more complicated question, is you and I basically talked when Ian hit, and we talked about parcels and numbers of parcels and how many may have been or not affected. Do we have any indication, after you deal with my first question, of what is remaining in the condo world and the various worlds where they're not necessarily on our tax rolls yet because they're still in limbo? I mean, I look at Sanibel to be a great example. My father-in-law lived in a condominium called La Playa, and right next door was by the sea. Well, that was torn down. So how many of those situations, because land is only going to get us so far, and then if I have a recollection, help me here, but I was under the impression when you walked into this job that maybe the breakdown between land and building wasn't necessarily as accurate as it can be. So help me understand the parts, because there's a lot of parts to this. I'm trying to understand what's recovery, what still can be recovery, and where are we in this recovery, if you will, because that's important as well as these numbers, because it seems like construction I thought would be higher, new construction, but you might tell me we still got 500, 5,000, whatever number of properties still that are in there. I don't know if you have any information like that.
Well, to the specific number of parcels that are still needing to be brought back on, I want to say, I'll get you the exact number, but I want to say we're somewhere south of 10,000 parcels, maybe around 8,000 in terms of property IDs, but it might be even be better than that at this point. And I do think, just to your anecdotal example on Sanibel, in their case in particular, I expect most of their Gulfront real estate that is going to remain improved, the stuff that didn't get torn down outright, appears to me whatever's left that's not on the tax roll this year will substantially, most of it will be on the tax roll for January 1 of 26. As you go up and down West Gulf and Middle Gulf Drive, you can see they're getting to the point that, knock on wood, if they don't have another reason to delay, most of those properties that are going to be reoccupied should be coming back on in 26 from my anecdotal observation. But we'll get you a specific number. As to that gap between those two numbers, again, Department of Revenue complicates, maybe an uncharitable way to describe it, but complicates the concept of new construction by combining both truly new construction and all of the improved properties that were off the roll because of the disaster are now coming back on. Now, each one of those properties that were affected by the storm, while we zeroed out their improvement value, they still were able to maintain their homestead or 10 cap. And so when the improvement value gets put back on, we bring it forward year by year and calculate what it would have been absent the storm occurring in terms of their value. So that's what's going to generate that gap between the just and the taxable. Because in a normal new construction setting, right, all of the new construction should come on at just value. And so by and large, what you're seeing in that 4.5 is the effect of those caps coming back into place. And then you look and say, okay, well, if you still had 9.4 billion in new construction just as we've defined it, but you still have a decline in the just, I think that's an indicator that if we had had zero new construction, our just probably would have declined by closer to 6 or 7%. So it was that addition that probably closed that gap. And matches is still not as strong as where DOR has concluded year over year, but probably would be closer to their numbers than where we're at in terms of the effect for the tax roll. And then back to the broader question, we talked anecdotally. We have obviously had additional hurricane impacts this last year with Helene and Milton. If you might have seen the full chart if you had that we produce. For example, Upper Captiva has a significant loss. We still need some work to do in there, and to Commissioner Pendergrass's point, there is always the potential for some change, potentially some improvement from your perspective for the budget building by the July 1 number, because we're going to continue to evaluate those properties that were classified, for example, as damaged, and maybe we haven't gotten to a conclusion we're satisfied with yet. And so we continue that right up until June 30th to plug those parts and pieces in to develop what ends up being put into the July 1 number. But as a practical matter, out of what is 144 billion in taxable value, probably unlikely to see a significant enough change to really change y'all's discussion in terms of what you want to tackle at this point.
Follow up to the point you made, and I'll just use the 10,000 as a hypothetical number. There's 10,000 units that you're still dealing with, and you had made a statement that a lot of them will come online, certainly soon. Do we have a number that obviously are not going to come online? They've been torn down, and instead of parcels, I'm trying to understand taxable value. I'm trying to understand what is recovery, what is still not going to come from recovery. I mean, we as a body went to the legislator and indicated that we were going to have a need for revenue replacement. And the design of that was obviously as an impact of these values that have obviously been decreased through no decision we made. And I'm not saying that people didn't, deserve the property relief, but I'm trying to understand, if you look 1 and 3 and 5 years out, what does it look like? Because I know there's conditions with inventory, and I've heard a lot of different anecdotes, okay? Hurricane fatigue, our population's getting older, too much inventory. There's other factors. I heard you comment before, but I've also had many constituents indicate, especially when you look at the coastal area that I represent, they're taking numbers that are somewhat shocking. And I don't know what you do with a condo where it's torn down and you may be in your 70s and your kids don't want it. And, we came across some of these exact experiences as a family ourselves. So I'm trying to get some indication, if I can, and maybe it's not today, there's 2,000 units that are offline and we don't think they're coming online. And that value is X.
Yeah, I think we could easily capture for you what is the total destroyed number and put a value on that. What I would say as a caveat to that, though, is the market morphed radically following Hurricane Ian. And you talked about the conversations we've had in the past about being more accurate in terms of the allocation between the land and the improvement. That was not only a goal, just a relative goal of mine as an appraiser, but it became obviously a critical need now that we've had this level of interaction with FEMA and going through the 50% process. We collectively don't want to be hassled that our allocations are inaccurate between those two components. The market shifted, though, because of what the storm unlocked in terms of potential. I'll give you an example. If you think about south of Cape Coral Parkway, pre-storm, you would have seen fairly regularly the standard Gulf American Corp house built in the 1960s on a direct access canal lot, maybe fetching 600, 650. You know, outdated, not really what the market was demanding, but there was no impetus to acquire those, tear them down, and build what is currently the demand in terms of the building design. The hurricane facilitated that event, right? It flooded innumerable numbers of those homes and made it impractical and in some cases illegal because of the 50% rule to rehabilitate them. They have to be torn down. And so now, post-hurricane, for one of those quarter-acre lots without a house, you're looking at $750 at least in that neighborhood, right? So we've had the land actually appreciated as a result of the improvement being removed from the situation. And that's a standard concept in appraisal. That's you deal with those kind of questions in a redevelopment area. You deal with those kind of questions in an urban built-out area, and you deal with those kind of questions when you get improvements that are at the end of their physical life. And when you think about that at scale, because of the nature of how our market developed, it really did. Broad geographic areas have the same identical age, basically at the same time. And so you get an event like this, and you get a lot of that that happens very quickly. The same thing we saw out on Fort Myers Beach. Your interior lots, not beachfront, but your interior lots with an old wood frame 1950s cottage. You know, maybe you could have found one for $500,000. You were kind of bidding in that range. After the cottage gets torn down, it's a one-time only sale, is what the market viewed. And so those lots without the house are now trading for that $700,000, $800,000 price point. We saw really that same effect. So the nature of your question, I think we can absolutely give you the number of units. We can capture what their pre-storm value is or was. But in many of the places where this happened most acutely, it actually changed the market itself because it unlocked all of that land and put it back on the market, land that had not been available for development for the previous half century.
So you'll be able to provide, there's 2,000 units and that value might be X? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we can get that together.
Yeah. Just trying to understand this a little clearer. I personally was somewhat shocked when I received my own statement, from your office at the decrease in value, and it was significant. I mean, I was shocked at the readjusted value, and I don't know how that occurred because my development's now being built out. There's a ton of new construction. The demand's off the charts, but it's inconsistent what we believe the property value is worth. And then your office gave me a bill that was dramatically lowered, and I don't know how that occurred.
Yeah, ultimately it's the result of the sales activity that we're seeing in the market. I mean, the prices have calmed down. The peak of the price, I don't want to describe it as a bubble because I don't want to mislead people to think we're in some kind of similar situation to 2008. In 2008, we had north of 15,000 housing units that were being built on spec and had no occupant the day after the music stopped. We aren't sitting here with that kind of vacancy, but when you had that kind of vacancy, it drove the supply was so far out of whack from not only demand but effective demand when credit then dried up and people, you could only make a purchase at cash. So we're not dealing with that scenario, but there absolutely has been. I know in our conversations I've described it as a flattening, more or less, but the more we have studied on it, looked at the different pieces of the puzzle, it has been a decline year over year. But again, I want to put that in the context of what we've experienced in the last 4 years, right? So when you're talking about going from $133 billion in just value to where we're at right now, which is $211 billion, that's only in 4 years. I think in any other context, we would look at that and say that's not sustainable. and expect that you would have some retreat of some kind. At this moment, as I said, in the second quarter of 2025, I'm not seeing a retreat that's going to, say, continue in a downward spike to match that curve. That's not what I'm seeing, because again, I'm still seeing properties that are selling in less than 3 months when they're priced appropriately. But I think, well, I know they are definitely priced below the very highest point that we saw roughly this time in 2024. That was kind of the peak in terms of pricing. End of spring 2024, sales activity was much slower last summer. It picked up substantially after the election, and it has been fairly consistent through the first quarter of this year. But as is normal in our market, because it does still have a seasonal impact to it, it's slowed down over the last 4 weeks post-Easter. That's pretty typical, but not slowed down any more than it does in a normal post-Easter season.
Just one last question. Sorry to belabor, just trying to get some clarity as I put together the pieces of this puzzle. So I hear you indicate that properties were selling fairly quickly if priced properly. What type of adjustment from the peak, if I had to ask you for a ballpark estimate from the peak, what would a non-waterfront and in waterfront adjustment be?
It'd be somewhere between 5 and 10%, but mostly, again, in the condos are where you see that most acutely. I wouldn't say that you've seen that, for example, in the still highly competitive entry-level house in Lehigh Acres, right? I mean, there's still absolutely more demand for that product than can be filled, and you're still seeing building permits pulled every day. So clearly the builders think there's still potential to make a profit in that market. It is absolutely much softer in the north of 400,000 price point, just across Lee County. There's a lot of luxury product that's been built, came into the pipeline through the 2019 to 2022 phase, and it's coming online. It doesn't seem to me to be enough to create a huge vacancy problem and really flip the supply-demand upside down. But it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge for the typical median income earner to look at a housing unit at $400,000. And so in that context, we're really dependent as a community on outside immigration, right? That's mostly not going to be absorbed by your local kid that's graduating from high school and going and getting your median job. That's really relying on retirees and second home buyers to move into the market and absorb those properties.
I was trying to draw some conclusions between your just, assessed, and taxable, and then I tried to use my own individual tax bill to try to see how that correlates. And my own tax bill market assessed value is probably down a third.
Of what yours might be, and that is the challenge of the mass appraisal system. The high end tail and the low end tail, they both are going to have a statistical difference, and we are looking at what moves in mass, and what moves in mass is your typical single family home. I mean, the typical single family home, talking about 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car garage house, is most of what moves this market in Lee County.
I appreciate your explanation. Sorry to belabor a point. Just trying to get clarity.
That's. I think it's an important point. If any other commissioners have a... So I'll dive into kind of in that context about thinking about the future and what is our economy likely to look like. First, I think it's important, and some of you heard me mention this before, we are really unique as one of the major metro areas in the state. We don't have a military installation. We don't have a full-time pro sports team. We don't have theme parks. We do have a casino in the region in Immokalee. We don't have a major industrial port. We are, as a community and as a region, almost entirely dependent on retirees, and tourism. When you compare the region that we are and the size we are to our other peers around the state, there's a lot of economic drivers that they get the benefit of that just by the fact of history, we don't have those. So we're very much exposed in that regard to where people are in terms of disposable income. So if you then think about new construction, absolutely has been the driver in large part of gains in the tax roll that y'all have relied on over the last really 50 years. New construction's been what's driven our economy. I think it's important. This shows all the parcels that are remaining in Lee County that are in a single ownership and more than 160 acres, so bigger than a quarter section. This is not all the vacant parcels. There are still 10-acre and 40-acre and 30-acre parcels scattered around. But when you think about a substantial development, the kind of questions, for example, that are likely to come before you as a board to negotiate, this is what you got left. And I'm sure you can recognize almost all the ones I've got highlighted here. But this is not a long-term development horizon. We really are in the final phase of substantial build-out as a county, and that's a different world than those of us that have lived here for 40-plus years and grown up here. That's like a completely different economic picture than the one that we've been enjoying and developing our worldview around. And I've taken a little bit of, I think you can recognize what the mining parcels are. I've designated them as development in as much as they're ready or in the process of moving forward with actual development. And then the ones that are agriculture, again, y'all may recognize most of them and may recognize there may be plans for development in the 5-year term future, but they don't necessarily right now have anything before you or any plans that I can say firmly they have. But again, that's not a lot left. So we are likely to see that new construction number, as you think about the 5-year and definitely the 10-year horizon, that new construction number as a percentage of the taxable value is going to change. Now, what isn't captured here is the fact that Cape Coral is still only 2/3 built out. Lehigh is still only 1/2 built out. So if you're in the business of single lot home building, you probably have a good horizon, maybe another 20, 30 years before you get through absorbing or practical absorption, because you're unlikely to see complete build out of every single lot. What's more likely to happen is what's happened in those other major metro areas as they have cruised towards the 1 million population mark. You've seen their population rate of growth drop from double digits down to an annual rate of 1% or less. And so that's still a lot, right? 1% of 1 million people is still a lot of new people every year, but it's definitely a much slower rate than the one, again, we've experienced for the last 4 or 5 decades. So, any other questions on those thoughts?
No, sir.
Not so much on those thoughts, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Absolutely.
So you're going to certify it July 1st. My experience has told me between now and July, we've typically seen a little bit of an increase between the June 1 number and the July 1 number. Can you just kind of explain what happens between now and July 1? And, obviously you don't have a crystal ball on what that increase is going to look like, but, what should we start to prepare ourselves for?
Yeah, so, what the work looks like inside our office over this 30-day period, first is the additional work that's been added to this bucket because of the hurricanes, and that's looking at each, particularly of the coastal jurisdictions, and seeing if there is a class of property or a large piece of property that has not been properly vetted, and it needs to come on the tax roll as of January 1st. It actually was reoccupied as of that date. And so the potential does exist for some of that. Again, I don't think it's going to change the number at scale for the county. It may very well make a difference, say, for Upper Captiva Fire District or for Sanibel City, because they're much smaller jurisdictions, so one property for them would make a much bigger difference. The balance of it are all the categories, so reevaluating all of the exemptions, reevaluating, I'm going to meet this week and reevaluate the entire agricultural classification book and approvals or denials that go out. To the extent that they get denied, that's value that will be brought back onto the roll. We'll look through all of the nonprofit institutional properties, make sure we have those properly classified. We've had to go through that process fresh, for example, with Lee Health, since they moved from being a public entity to a private nonprofit. Although they still qualify, we had to go through every single piece of property that they own and evaluate whether it met the public purpose of the nonprofit. And there is a potential there for some of those if they aren't truly designated, but as I recall, they're all planned within the near-term future for a hospital development, so they qualify. But just checking through each of those major metrics and then continuing to refine the work. If we will, glad to bring y'all by. It'd be a little tech-heavy to try to present here, but if you want to come by and see the Intense GIS system where we capture, say, all of North Cape Coral, all of the dry lots all at once, and display it as a heat map and look for iterations that don't make sense, right? If we see some strong spike in one little area that we know doesn't actually have any distinguishing difference from east to west, then we'll get to work zooming in and cleaning that up. But by and large, I'm very happy with where our tools are. We've added an enormous number of tools over the last 5 years to try to streamline a lot of this work and not have it be, I don't want to denigrate it as being ad hoc, but very much not as granular as we need to be, considering the tools available to us today in 2025. So that's really a broad stroke, I know, but it's a lot. It's 550,000 parcels. So, like I said, come by this week and I'll show you through it all.
Any other questions for Matt? Matt, certainly appreciate your detailed explanation. We obviously are surprised. I gather, and as a conclusion I'll draw, but correct me, across all the municipalities, well, the number is something lower than most people expected?
Yeah, that's pretty consistent. That ratio, there might have been, like I think Fort Myers Beach taxable is up 5% instead of 4%. But as I recall, Estero was flat, truly flat. So it really, there is some variation. Again, the fire districts, when you get down to that small level, particularly on the coast, have some more significant impacts after Helene and Milton. And that really is what we're working on this week to make sure we're satisfied that we've classified those properties as actually uninhabitable as of January 1, because that's going to be a huge hit. I mean, it's a double-digit hit for Upper Captiva right now in the negative.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Anything else? Pete, you're up.
Back to you.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. So today is your first look at the capital improvement plan and major maintenance budget for fiscal year 25-26, and then these are 5-year plans, so they go out through 29-30. However, the major focus is the coming year, which is 25-26. This just gives you a budget timeline of how we got to where we are, and the significance of the 10-Mile Canal South flood mitigation project. I'll refer to that a little bit later. We've got some funding that we want to apply to that, but I'll get into that. And then we went through transportation tiers and budget assumptions in April. And here we are at the draft capital improvement major maintenance plan, and then we'll get into the operating budgets throughout the summer and the public hearings in September. It's still very early on in the process, So there's lots of opportunity for discussion, lots of opportunity for vetting certain projects, looking at timelines, and potentially based on, just the tax base, potentially there might be some cuts also. So the question we'll ask at the end, is there anything else you would like us to consider? And we'll have just a couple recommendations at the end. One major one, I'll just kind of give a spoiler alert here, will be we want to, this coming year, take a little different approach to those capital projects that we pay out of the general fund, both for the county and then also for the constitutionals, the big part being the sheriff's office. And we want to wait till after year end, when our year end closes and we know exactly what our reserves are going to be, and then we'd like to come back to the board in December and actually fund those projects. And I think we will have success in funding those projects, but I still want to see what the year end results are. So just your CIP, and commissioners, just break in anytime if you have specific questions. Just at a glance, CIP and major maintenance, there's really few new projects in the pipeline that were added for 25, 26, or even in the 5-year plan. And we'll get into that a little bit. We have been on a pay-as-you-go basis for a lot of major maintenance and a lot of capital projects, and for many years now, and that is coming to an end. So we will have to look at other alternatives. We do have some priority projects that the board has considered to be priority projects in the past. Primarily those CIP projects that are funded from the general fund that have become unfunded just because of costs, inflation, better refining of the project itself. And I'll get into those, and those are the ones we'd like to come back to you in December and say, okay, we think this makes sense to fund, or we've done some value engineering on this now, it's a little less, we'd like to fund that. And then, commissioners, we've issued some debt over the past decade. Say we've done a lot of refinancing based on favorable interest rates, but we have not issued a lot of new debt. Over the next several years, primarily in the enterprise funds, we will be issuing a lot of debt, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that is repaid with the fees that are charged by those enterprise funds. And then I'm not sure you all brought it today, but you have the full CIP and major maintenance spreadsheets. This just gives you a quick breakdown of where the major costs are. And as I was saying, for the enterprise funds, which are solid waste, DOT, which is tolls, and utilities, those are where your significant capital is going in 25, 26. And then major maintenance. A good portion of major maintenance is paid from the general fund, and you can see that on the very right-hand column, because those are departments that don't have dedicated funding sources for those major maintenance type projects. They may have dedicated funding sources like impact fees for new construction, but not for replacement and just basic major maintenance. So we'll discuss that a little bit also in a few slides here. Any questions on that slide? Okay, commissioners, I know this is very busy, and so just please, this is the new projects. Just focus here on fiscal year 25, 26, and all of these projects in 25, 26 are funded. We'll get into this later, but you see the fund, that 30100, that is what is called General Fund CIP. And that is CIP projects that are funded from whatever we throw off from the general fund annually. There was a separate tax rate for that years ago, but that has gone away. So each year we look at what we can fund for those projects from the general fund. But everything you see in this column is funded. A lot of that is either from impact fees or in the enterprise funds from the enterprise user fees. Just about that general fund CIP that I've mentioned, and we've talked about this a lot in the past because I think we've kind of talked about this for several years about the challenges we have in that fund. Before 2007-08, we had a $500,000 property tax rate that was dedicated to capital projects that did not have dedicated funding sources like the enterprise funds. Through a combination of tax reform in 2007, 2008, the recession, that tax rate went away and was ultimately absorbed by just the general fund operating tax rate. So right now, the current funding for what remains, and it did come with some built-up reserves in that fund. But what we've done since then is the only things that we can fund it with are excess reserves each year from the general fund, grants, or if there are variances. So if we forecasted a project at a certain amount, it ended up costing less, and that reverted to the fund balance and could be reused in that fund. So that fund will go negative next year in 25-26, and that was a prediction we also made last year, and a lot of that has to do with the new EMS stations that we are building. We have a plan, though. This is just so you know where major maintenance and CIP projects are funded from. On the left is the project type, and on the right is the funding source. So the enterprise funds, utilities, solid waste, toll bridges, they all have their specific user fees, tolls for toll bridges, garbage rates for solid waste, utilities rates for utilities. Roads, you have a combination of funding sources that you use to fund roads. But public safety, parks and recreation, natural resources, and just facilities, maintaining county facilities that aren't related to one of these other enterprise funds, and for constitutional offices, that all comes from excess reserves. So there is a lot of pressure on excess reserves in the general fund. This is very busy, but this is your general fund, and you can see the $692 million for fiscal year 24-25, and it's a combination of the constitutionals, county departments that are funded from there, and then joint costs. But something I wanted to show here, which is a challenge we have going forward that we're managing as best as we can, but it will continue to be something we talk about. Major maintenance that is paid from the general fund. So like before, these are a combination of parks and recreation major maintenance that can't be paid for with impact fees. It's all the constitutional offices. It's, for example, the Justice Center across the way that had a multi-year replumbing project going on. It's for county facilities. 20 years ago, we were building a lot of new infrastructure, not a lot of new buildings, and we were using the current revenues in those years to pay for that construction and that infrastructure. Now, after 20, 25 years, of course, some buildings are older, like the Justice Center, but in order to extend the life of those buildings, your major maintenance to extend the life and to maintain those buildings goes up. So you have this kind of trailing tail of major maintenance that is trailing your facilities, and the cost continues to increase as you go along. So that's something that you can see from this has occurred over the last 10 years, and we will continue to have happen. This is really busy, and we're not going to go through this whole thing, but what I want to show you is this 33.3 million in 24-25. As you can see, the first column there is that 33 million. And then you can see what's proposed for 25-26. This is a combination of county facilities, parks and recreation, and some public safety. That 38.6 million, based on the tax base increase, we may have to take a look at that and see if there are certain things we could change the timing on, maybe push out, value engineer. An example, if you go, down in Parks and Recreation, the Pine Island Community Pool renovation, that pool has not been renovated for 25 years. And it is leaking some water, as older pools tend to do. We can defer that a year or two, but we can't defer it for a substantial amount of time. But that's something that we'll be working on between now and when we meet back in August with the board, is how can we refine that number, and will that number fit into what we're trying to do in the general fund as far as balancing the general fund. I alluded to this earlier. This is that 301 account, that general fund CIP, which we now have projects. When I say go negative, it means we have priority projects that we don't have the funding for anymore. Now, will we have them in surplus reserves? Yes, I believe we will. And I'll just go through these real briefly. The 10-mile canal south, that is something that was discussed in that January workshop. That was to improve water flow during rain events in the south end of 10-mile canal, and it included a kind of a cut of what was a peninsula there that would improve water flow and some dredging. That's $1 million. Kika Preserve berm and water control, that's a Boca Grande mine, which a private developer will be building a berm. But in order to make that work for the Kika Preserve project, we're going to have to build up to a higher level, and that portion to the higher level is a cost of the county. Department directors are here if you need more specific information on these projects. Shade structures, parks and playgrounds, that all right there is Three Oaks Community Park, and a lot of those shade structures are the dugouts for the baseball diamonds. And then public safety, these are numbers that we'll be value engineering, but we have been collecting money in this fund for 5 EMS stations, which were all growth impact stations. And we have about, I believe we have about 15 million saved up. This final 10 million is not been funded yet. So what I would like to do with the board is, and I think it's a good strategy maybe moving forward, because sometimes we make commitments out of general fund reserves when we don't know what the reserve is actually going to be. What I would like to do for projects like these, the sheriff's office, a capital, and I believe we will be able to fund these items. But I would like to wait till after year-end close, and in the December timeframe, we know exactly what our reserves are going to be. I believe we will have good one-time reserves this year because we have kind of an anomaly. Last year, there was a cyber attack on the billing company that bills for EMS, and so the company was not able to bill for about half the year. So we only collected about half of the revenues from EMS billing, which is a major revenue in the general fund. We changed billing companies this year. They rebilled what was delinquent, and we have made that all up this year. So I believe while we have some over budgeting in revenues from the state this year, because state revenue sharing is kind of flattening out, I believe we'll have really good EMS revenues, but that's a one-time kind of blip. But I believe we will have good excess reserves at the end of this year. I just want to wait and make sure what that is.
Hey, real quick, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Absolutely.
Before we leave this slide, I'm looking at these projects. A lot of them do seem to be growth driven. We were going to were we going to do a blend of impact fees to cover these EMS stations, or were we going to pay for them out of the general fund?
Out of the general fund, the impact fee for EMS is, I believe, $50 per home. It really generates a couple hundred, several hundred thousand a year. It's somewhat insignificant. Unfortunately, with impact fees, when we do an impact fee study, and you haven't built stations for a long time, the assumption is kind of, well, here's what your impact fee is going to be, even though you're planning to. So you're always kind of playing catch up with that, but that's all kind of general fund committed right now.
So we charge the impact fee for EMS, though, at 100% of what the study said we should.
Correct.
And the study did not give us enough money then to handle what was coming in. Okay. Thanks.
And then this shows the EMS stations. You've seen this before, kind of where they're going, what corridors, and then there's an Alva station here too, which is just a little bit to the right of that circle at the top of the screen. Those are the major 5 stations that are being paid through the general fund. There's a major station in Cape Coral, but that's being paid with DR funding. Okay, within major maintenance in the general fund, in that $33 million this year that you saw and $38 million next year, there is something called countywide building renovations. That's primarily major maintenance, some expansions for constitutional offices and some county offices, as you can see, the Natural Resources Lab. What I want to show you here is this year that $11.5 million is in the $38 million I showed you. We're going to work on that $38 million cost as we go through the budget process now that we have the tax base. What I do want to show you is the medical examiner expansion has been in this plan for a good 5 years or more. And that's a $30 million project cost, and we really don't have a dedicated funding source for that yet. We will have, in the general fund, we are paying about $15 million a year now in debt service that ends after this year. So that could be dedicated toward that, either in full for a couple of years, or we could do some sort of short-term, maybe bank loan to kind of ease and amortize that cost. The board approved our new financial advisor a couple meetings ago, and we've met with them on not only the bonding we're going to have to do, but this project. And so we will come back to you with a plan for that. But I just want to show you that that's a big project. It's a high cost project that we're not really getting any help on.
Gotcha. Hey, before we leave this slide, Mr. Chairman, if I may, wanted to kind of chat with Dave a little bit. I mean, this is kind of one of those areas where if this was in our house or our personal business, we would look at this and say, all right, which ones are the must-dos? As we're trying to whittle this budget down, which ones are the legally required to-dos, which ones are the have-to-dos, and which ones are the nice-to-haves? And I guess if I'm hearing Pete correctly, you guys are going to have that discussion and bring back to us a proposal to kind of whittle this down some to make sure we fit in the budget number that we're trying to fit into. Okay. Yeah, because I could see where like the west window leak, we've got a window that's leaking. We need to pay for that. We need to get the leak taken care of before it does damage. But maybe you look at the, the elevator change out. Are the elevators working well? Could we go another year? Could we shift that into a future year? Is that kind of how you're going to look at that, or talk to me about that process?
Well, we've already started to sit down with facilities and have the discussion of what we can do to push out further. Some of these projects, like the elevator, they're way overdue, so they were pushed out over a period of time. But we're looking at everything, so we're looking at all those items that you see on the list there, and having that discussion.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Chair, if I have a question.
Absolutely.
So we're halfway through the current year, roughly, right? Is there anything on our current budget list that we haven't started yet that we could look at any of those? We haven't started yet. Is there anything else to shift that we've already approved into this budget? Is that somewhere else? Again, it's what I would be doing at my own house, as Brian.
We're looking at everything. We have been talking to the departments about current projects as well as upcoming projects for the following year. So yes, we are.
Things that were a big priority a year ago, based on the current environment, maybe we need to re-examine some of the ones we haven't started yet and see if those need to be pushed back a bit or.
Yes, there's still, the board.
Necessary.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The board gave us strategic priorities. Some of those strategic priorities, we are going to come back and ask if we can push out over a period of time.
And then, Commissioners, this is the bond financing I was talking to you about. It may not be bonds, but most likely will be in the enterprise funds. And these projects are familiar to you. We've talked about these for several years. But on the right is just the total project cost. And then on the left, there's the financing portion. So a number of these projects we've either been collecting money for, we've already spent costs on, but we have a delta. And so you can see Cape Coral Bridge replacement is a major project. It's all going to be replaced and expanded. We will be coming back to the board probably in early 2027 for approval to sell bonds. Maybe a little bit before that, but sell the bonds either early in 2027 or about halfway through 2027. Solid waste, you have the material recovery facility, and then the waste to energy life extension renovations that are being done right now. And then utilities, the two big projects, and this is not all inclusive. You'll see in your spreadsheets that there's a lot more projects, but these are the major ones. The Southeast Water Reclamation Facility to serve the growth in the southeast portion of the county, and then the Fort Myers Beach Water Reclamation Facility, wastewater treatment plant, which is a very old plant, was planned to be refurbished and renovated before Hurricane Ian, and then had major destruction during Hurricane Ian. So that's another facility that not only serves Fort Myers Beach, but also the southern part of south of Fort Myers. All of these, when we do a bond, we come to the board at least 4 times as we select underwriters, as we size the bond and the time frame for the bond, and get approval for the bond. Oh, and get approval for the bond, sorry.
I think, Chairman, if I may, you have a question too?
Yeah, I certainly had a number, but it's a little hard to get everything. Maybe I'm just too old. I don't know. Trying to listen to you properly. So help me out. You got this chart on the page, and obviously one column says financing portion, the other says project cost. I mean, I quickly go through 106 million, 30 million, 17 million. 76 million. What's the total between projected cost and funding portion? What's the difference? Looks to me to be a couple $100 million.
Commissioner, I can't, you mean the delta between the two columns?
Well, financing portion, and then you got projected costs. So
right.
Obviously the difference is, if I look at one column to the other, the first column is, $106 million. The next one is 30 million, so 136. Next one's 17.
Yeah.
153. The next one is 67. I mean, we've got $250 million worth of
Correct.
projected costs greater than what we finance. So let me ask the $250 million question. How do we pay for it?
Through bonds, by issuing debt through bonds.
So, but you're saying the financing portion is only 382, where the cost is 488.
So we've already spent about we've spent about $20 million already on the project, just from pay as you go, and then we anticipate by the time that we issue bonds, we'll have collected $87 million that we've sunk into a fund.
So all the projected costs are from revenues from the past and/or anticipated revenues before the project goes to finance?
Correct,
We found that, okay.
correct, yeah.
So we're going to be able to financing the portion of this. Okay, great.
Yeah. So an example is that Fort Myers Beach Reclamation Facility, we've got, I believe, 125 million of state revolving fund, 100 million of that we can get loan forgiveness on. So it's a combination of either collected funds or other financing mechanisms.
So maybe just go into a little bit more detail, just trying to understand, in all these enterprise funds, we seem to have some capacity to pay these projects or pay for these projects as we're going, and then we're obviously going to finance the balance. I'm trying to understand, basically you would have an opening balance, your collected revenue, your expenses, and your ending balance. So just looking historically, we have not been a county that has done any indexing or any CIP in any of these enterprise funds. We have, and again, it's what we believe the citizens wanted, but on a 10-year plan, if I was to look 10 years backwards, we haven't done a significant job adjusting for inflation. There's been many items that have come to us where we've had 30 or 40% increases because we hadn't raised any of the enterprise fees in 10 or 12 years. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, I think, and commissioners, I think in the last few years we've done a good job in solid waste of collecting additional fees for inflation costs that we've experienced. I think for projects at the size that you're looking at in utilities, you may be This is I don't want to predict anything at this point because we're meeting with our financial advisor to kind of size these bonds and look at the timetable for these bonds. But we may be looking at potential rate increases.
Might be coming, what?
Potential rate increases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a question real quick.
Absolutely.
Chairman. Just, I don't know why it didn't stick out to me when we were doing our briefing, Pete, but it does to me now. Before we spend $130 million on the material recovery facility, I know I personally would like to understand that project better. My memory, if it serves me correctly, and maybe Amanda even knows, we were losing money on recycling, right? We were kind of paying to recycle, and I don't know if I want to spend $130 million to build a new facility to then continue to not make money on recycling. I guess I want to understand the project. I want to understand recycling and its impact on our solid waste department before I commit to $130 million and borrowing $100 million for a recycling facility. I get it. We bought that land and everything like that, but I guess I'm having some sticker shock on the price tag on that one right now.
Commissioners, we can come back to you. We can come back to you in August and give you a little further review of that.
Because I mean, we could pivot that into maybe another waste to energy plant that might make some money back on the power. I don't know. I would love to just see the financials before we, I don't know, think about that.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
We could bring that back for the next budget presentation in August and have a robust discussion and bring the utilities folks in. Unfortunately, Rebecca's not here today, but we can bring her in for the next meeting and have that discussion.
And if it's not imminent, then we can even do it later. Before we, I want to understand that project better. That's a lot of money to put into something.
We can do that.
Just to pick up where Commissioner Hammond, has made a comment and where I think we're going, and whether we don't have ample revenue to deal with the expense, whether it's a ongoing maintenance, which if you look at page 11, our maintenance costs have gone from $12 million to $33 million. So they've almost tripled. So what you're doing is straining the enterprise fund because we determine the fee, the expenses come in, and the expenses are greater than what the fee we're collecting, ergo we have a deficit, or we're not building up enough of reserve. listen, I wasn't here, but I governed in a different place. And we were big on CIP and having every enterprise fund with a continuing increase for inflation. We've done a dozen years here or more in these enterprise funds. And if there's no proof in the pudding, you look at major maintenance, which has tripled, and it's putting an enormous strain on our general fund to be able to fund things because the users are not covering the cost with inflation. If you index, you have an opportunity to build up that savings or that balance in that enterprise fund, and you anticipate expenses for the future. When you don't, we come up with these significant. So I appreciate your comment, Commissioner Hammond. There's $30 million. There's a project that makes sense, but we're already invested. When you look at the difference between the right column and left column, a couple $100 million that we've invested without adequate balances in the enterprise funds. And all these things are coming together as one. I mean, we have a revenue stream that basically has been taking a gut punch. A couple of years ago, we sat in this room and said we needed revenue replacement because there were so many municipalities that were offline. Matt gave us an indication of those. So we advocated for revenue replacement, yet we're now in the middle of some of these projects where we haven't indexed for inflation. We're straining the general. Our revenue comes in lighter because as much as they've grown, we still didn't have Sanibel, which was a negative 30%. Fort Myers Beach was a negative 40%. We advocated for revenue replacement, yet we now have this $25 million we're not using. So my revenue didn't come in as planned. We advocate for revenue replacement, but we're not going to use the money. To me, that is, it blows every gasket in my head. How do we do that? Because there's things that we need to do here. One, we have a staff that kills for us, does whatever. This commissioner is certainly going to advocate the same thing I have in the last couple of years. It's not even debatable from this commissioner's point of view that we're going to do anything other than give our employees a 5% raise. And that's not even up for discussion. We have $35 million we've collected. Is that about the difference? And we have about a $16 or $17 million deficit?
I don't have the exact
But the sheet you gave us yesterday when you were in my office talked about basically what money that was going to bring in. Am I misremembering that?
I think from the April workshop, we were projecting a $13 million deficit.
Okay, $13 million deficit, of which revenue that we had, so we're operating at a $13 million deficit.
Next year, projected. However, you know, we're cutting budgets right now. So
I mean, I recognize, but how much can you cut? Because there just seems to be the perfect storm. We have enterprise funds that haven't been indexed for any type of inflation for the last dozen years. They're putting enormous pressure on the general fund. We have major maintenance that has tripled in 7 years. Again, with no balances to absorb their increase. How much can we just go to excess reserves? And we're at the lowest level we've had excess reserves. And we also recognize that we're going to have revenue replacement needs, and we advocate for revenue replacement, yet we're not using the revenue replacement we received. And you're trying to balance a budget with less revenue, with revenue that we didn't have from Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel and some of the others. And now we have this strain of all these capital projects and the maintenance required. We just shuffling chairs on the Titanic here? What are we doing? How do we get through this?
Could I ask a question for clarification? Because I wasn't able to, I don't see in the numbers where we're using general fund to pay for maintenance on enterprise fund projects. Could you show me where I could
So
find that? Yeah.
basically what you're doing is using the general fund and the excess reserves to pay for capital projects.
Mm-hmm.
And when the capital project is put forward, it has a cost of maintaining it going forward.
Sure.
So we only pay for the project. We don't have any factor for that cost to go up. That is tripled, and I'm just saying, how do we pay for that tripling?
Well, if I may, again, I'm just trying to clarify and understand better to make sure we're all on the same page, but could we go back to that 33 million real quick? And look at those projects to see, I just want to see which ones are enterprise. So are
These are all general fund.
these are, so I think we don't have an enterprise fund for parks or natural resources or facilities, but we do have an enterprise fund for solid waste. And so like for the major maintenance on the waste energy plant, that refresh, we're going to use our enterprise fund to pay for that $75 million project. We're not going to use the general fund to do that. Am I seeing it differently?
No,
Yeah.
but your comment before was that we're not making money in solid waste.
Well, recycling, that part of the business, I remember a couple years ago, right, it had gone negative. We were subsidizing it. But again, it was all within the enterprise fund, I
And
thought.
again, what I'd love to see as a commissioner is to understand how often we use the general fund, because we use this just 30,000 foot example where Pete says, let me get to the chart. Current funding is excess reserves, grants, and variances.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
So I'm trying to understand, how do we pay for things as we go along? And when we deplete reserves, because we can't build reserves, so this year is an example of having $13 million shortfall. I think last year was 5.7, 6?
About 5.
5, okay. And we have these deficits that we have, and we're taking them out of reserves. That's how we balance this. And we just shuffle things. We just don't seem to have, we don't have adequate reserves, because what you're showing us, we don't have the money to do. And when you get into transportation, we also supplement transportation through GIF and different things that we do to try to fill in gaps, but we're still taking it out of the general fund to try to pay for an enterprise fund. I mean, the reality is you look at tolls. I just been up in the Northeast. As long as I've been here, we built the causeway in 2007. It's 2025. We've had 0 increases. And that's a revenue stream we have. So when we fall short, the subsidy comes from the general fund. All I'm saying is I'd love to see a chart over the last 5 years of what we've taken out of the general fund to subsidize things, because we have not increased any of our prices whatsoever.
This is kind of a snowball effect from being here. Say, if you look at the last 10 years, we every year, we don't increase the millage, we do rollbacks, we do that. The last 3 years, about a 38% increase in costs of products, consumer services. So our gas has gone up, our health insurance has gone up for employees. Everything keeps going up.
Yep.
But we've always held the line of the tax and we've reduced it, and we've used some reserves in the past, because we always say, when's that rainy day? We've had COVID, we've had oil spills, we've had hurricanes. We still have that reserve balance. We really don't ever usually have to use it. So it's easy to use a little bit of reserves for that. But this is a combination of what, like Pete said, 20 years ago, the county, a lot of things were built. Now the maintenance is coming due. Everything costs a whole lot more now to build, to fix. Tariffs is going to increase that cost even more. Certain products still and everything. But we've seen this, Commissioner Hammond, we've seen it here many years ago. We didn't have enough money to do anything. Now we got the money, and then we kept the taxes where we wanted to keep it, be conservative that way. But then, meanwhile, we continue to grow in the community services. We're actually servicing more people than we were 5-10 years ago, at a lower cost. If you think about per dollar, what we're providing services, EMS, Parks and Rec, DOT, what we're doing per person, we're actually doing it cheaper than we were 5 years ago. But we required that cost increase over the last 3 years because of what's happened over the last 3 years in the economy. And that's what's happened with that.
I agree with your points exactly, Commissioner Pendergrass. What we've done is we continue to absorb the increases, but we're running out of money. And we're now working into a situation where we get a curveball, and I know it's $5 million is the difference between what we anticipated for our increase, and that was severely decreased from the Revenue Conferencing Board, because when we sat in this room and you gave us what it looked like for the future, it was a much higher number. So we've basically adjusted. And to Commissioner Pendergrass's point, our deficit continues to grow, our expenses continue to increase, and our solution is to go to the general fund when we're short, because we've never built up. So tolls is an example. We only have a couple of revenue streams for transportation. We've leveraged them all, and we haven't gotten increases in any of the areas. Tolls haven't gone up, so we can't leverage that. Gas tax has been a challenge because, electric and different alternatives to that. So where are we getting the opportunity for additional revenue? It comes back to the general fund. I'd love to see a chart of how much over the last 5 years we've taken out of the general fund out of excess reserves. We do the capital expenditures for the sheriff's office. We take it out of reserves. We continue to do things. And I'm just looking at some of the fees, and I don't have an appreciation that the fee is adequate, but certainly the fee can't be adequate in transportation if we haven't raised the price in 17 years. And listen, we're not going to have a fun conversation when we go to do the Cape Coral bridges, because when we're going to do that, it'll be 25 years, and we toll increase? That's a conversation that's uncomfortable. But the reality is, we're still using the general fund to do that, and we have users that are here that are using our services and aren't paying for it. It goes back to the homeowners that are paying for it. Don't we go from 850 to 900,000 people to 1.4 million? Isn't that strain on all our services? How are they paying for it? It's great, it's free. Love that word. But the reality, as I'm trying to go through this big picture, Brian, is I'm trying to understand what have we done over the years. I've sat in this room, we went to Tallahassee, we advocated for revenue replacement, and we advocated so well, we were awarded the money, and we're trying to go forward without using that money. But we all acknowledge revenue was not where it was supposed to be from Ian. Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, they've all said we don't have the money. We're depleting what we have. And we're now at a place where reserves are the lowest they've been historically, with the highest property values we've seen in our lifetime. So the correlation is back, it's really gotten distorted. Highest values, lowest reserves. All I'm advocating is we have to do something different. And this board has done things in the past where you have borrowed money. We have some significant payments that are rolling off, $15 million. So from my point of view, I don't see how we don't put the $25 million into play, because I don't see how we're going to cut our way out of this. That's just my 2 cents.
I thought we, in our workshop last year, we did put the 25 million in, right? Or did we?
Pete, what's your direction in this year's budget? Are you to use the 25 million or you're not?
We were going to use 5 million of it for the deficit. We hit our reserve target, so we didn't use that. I think a couple points. One is that 25 million can be used to decrease deficits or to improve cash flow, to help with cash flow. That's the way I would describe it. The other thing I would say is that, and you all have kind of been talking about this in the commissioner, is funding capital projects out of an operating fund, which is the general fund, is not sustainable.
And again, the capital projects, I use transportation to be the easiest one of them all, because we're basically funding an enterprise fund or a service we do in an enterprise with general funds. There's some amount we're putting in that. And we're just out of money. And listen, from my understanding, you were going to balance this $13 million deficit without using the $25 million. Did I misremember that?
Correct. We wouldn't be using the 25 million.
You would or wouldn't?
Would not.
Would not. Okay. So we're going to let reserves go even further. We took $25 million. This board said, let's get revenue replacement, but we're not going to use the money? That makes no sense to me.
So, when is the 25 million due to be paid back? Right.
7 years from now?
7 years from now?
And we have a cash flow issue. Is that an accurate statement, Pete? We have cash flow in the next couple of years. We have some significant payments. The 15 million is one that we've paid. This is now our second tranche that we're paying back?
The 15 million, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Yeah, the balloon.
Oh,
How much
yeah,
was the initial
15 million,
balloon?
we've been paying that for several years. The last payment will be this coming year, 25, 26.
So the challenge is cash flow is being absorbed due to a prior obligation that we're now satisfying.
Correct.
So if that was a proper remedy, why wouldn't we do the same thing with the replacement, revenue replacement loan we got that's not due for 7 more years? Because we're going to have a cash flow increase when we pay that last $15 million off. So there'll be $15 million more. We can put the $15 million back. But we have this problem today where we don't have enough cash. And from this commissioner's point of view, I would like us to deploy the $25 million. We've done it before. Why the difference now?
Well, no, I think what you're saying is very valid, right? We were given this 25 million as a loan, right? At first it was a smaller, like a shorter term, but now term's been extended to 10 years, right? I think we were given this 25 million to use to cover the extra expenses related to, or maybe the budget shortfall related to Hurricane Ian, damage and what it did to our county, the revenue shortfall, all of that. So my thought is, yeah, absolutely, we should use it and understand that 7 years from now, we've got a balloon payment due of 25 million to the state, where either we're going to go to the state and say, hey, listen, we'd like to be forgiven for this loan, or we got to pay you back. But either one, we still would have 7 years to figure out how to come up with that payment. But in the meantime, yeah, you don't give somebody an emergency loan and then that person never uses it. It should be deployed. That's a valid thing to say, yes.
And just to follow up on that point, we then had 2 municipalities go up the following year and get grants, not loans, to basically balance their budget.
Yeah.
And there was certainly conventional thinking, until there seems to be change in the Senate and the House, that there was at least an open-mindedness that that grant, that loan was going to be potentially viewed as a grant and be forgiven. But again, we borrow money, we set a policy, and we don't use it. We advocated that we would have revenue replacement, we put it in a fund, and we don't use it. And I look at the financials that we have here, and we need cash. I don't know another way to get through this block.
So, Mr. County Manager, let me ask that, and you can direct it to whoever you'd like, probably Pete. So how does government do that? How does government basically say, look, we know we've got a loan that we've got to pay off 7 years from now. How do we recognize it as a loan that needs to be paid off 7 years from now, but go ahead and deploy it and just use it today? Because I don't want to see it go unused and then just it's 25 million that we basically put in a hole in the ground, and then 10 years later, when they come back and say, I'd like that 25 million back, we say, oh good, here it is, we've kept it nice and safe. No, I want to be able to say, look, this 25 million was a huge help. We put it into the budget when we needed it, and then we grew out of that deficit. We grew out of that tough time that was created by Hurricane Ian, and we're able to pay you back. Or the other way, we ask for forgiveness for the loan. I think either one is acceptable, but
how do we ask for forgiveness if we don't deploy the money?
right, exactly. I'm with you. So
Deploying the money, it would be just like the conversation we had on the 2 balloon payments that are coming in. What we would do is we would plan that in the budget as we go as an expenditure and how we would repay that. So you would look at over a couple of years when you would start to probably 2-3 years down the line, if we start to recover, you start to put some money aside for that over the period of time until the year 7 hits, you're able to pay it back.
Right. So, I mean, really, yeah, you're right. We could use this money, we could spend it this year and the next year, and then maybe when we get to 5 years till it's time to pay off, start setting aside $5 million a year in a sinking fund to then pay back the $25 million at the end of that 5-year term. That's one way to do it. But, so I have an idea that I've been wanting to share with you guys, and I haven't figured out the right time to share it. But, so I was really impressed with our team. They did a great job. They went out and fixed this dugout at the Hancock Little League ball field, the Kurt Donaldson Park. They fixed this thing for like less than 15 grand. I mean, it was a dugout that for 2 years had sat there with the roof ripped off of it, and it looked horrible. And we were kind of waiting. We were following the process. They were doing what we had directed them to do. They were following the process to repair it under FEMA's regulations, the FEMA way, so that we could get FEMA reimbursement. But the truth is, they were able to knock it out in like a couple weeks. And now the kids feel like life is back to normal because the dugout's back and the ball field feels normal to them again. I would be okay if we wanted to peel off a section of that 25 million to look through the county and say, what projects do we have that are, you know, we were waiting on the FEMA process to fix, but we could probably knock these out with this 25 million real quick and get Lee County looking a lot better and a lot more recovered quicker than if we had to wait for FEMA reimbursement and FEMA procurement and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, and I agree with your thoughts. All I'm trying to have a conversation is that we need to be open-minded. In any entity that I've ever run, we always do a 5 and a 10-year plan. Revenue, unfortunately, isn't flatlined. It goes up and down. And I do have lines of credit that I utilize that are due on demand, and we get through the cash flow valleys and peaks. That's what you do. And we've done this as a county before, and all I'm advocating, since I can't talk to anyone, is this is what we would do. And whether it's projects that, you know, we come together as a whole, it's money that we have advocated for, and we successfully advocated, and I was proud to certainly do what we did. I just think it would be certainly inconsistent with our ask is to put it in the ground, as you had indicated, and not do anything with it, because we're a business. We could project the next 5 or 7 years, and you want to do it like any other sinking fund. Okay, it's 25 million. We put 5 million aside for 5 years. We put the money back. It's no cost to us.
Right.
And if these financial documents we have in front of us don't give us an indication that we're in this downward trend and we're going to have some cash flow challenges in front of us, I don't think it's anything other than cash flow issues. And I do get some comfort looking at the debt when I know a $15 million payment's coming off, because next year's budget's, but I got to get to next year. How do I get there?
If I may, I could have sworn at some previous meeting that $25 million was taken to cash or moved over, reallocated at some point. Is the money still in the state bank account? We haven't transferred it to ourselves yet?
No, Commissioners, the money resides in reserves right now. In your $97 million of reserves. One thing I do want to clarify, that $25 million has to be used for operating costs. But we can come back to the board when we're talking about the operating budget and have a plan for you on how we intend to use that $25 million.
I think it's pretty easy to agree that we want to use the 0% loan for $25 million and take the money. If the money's cashed, the check is cashed, correct? Correct. Okay, so we can't say we didn't use it and have the state try to claw it back because we asked for emergency money we didn't use, to your point.
I was agreeing with what Commissioner Hammond said earlier about using the money to get these projects complete, but I was going to ask what the restrictions were. If it's operational projects, could it be used for capital improvement, or it could be re-operational? Can you define how we can use it, what the money can be used for, so we can understand what we're looking to do in the future?
Commissioners, will come back to you. It has to be used for operations. I don't know if that would include major maintenance. That's
so
something
like
that we
stormwater, dugouts, road paving, just trying to think of building additions, bathrooms, whatever it may be.
To supplement, we can
what could it be used for? To
we don't need to
put back to the community tomorrow. I mean, something we can see, something hard like a dugout or bathroom or water, retention, prevent flooding, whatever we can use it for. So.
Mr. Chair, I think what we will do based on what you're asking is, we'll come back to you on the 25 million and what it can be used for and how. We'll also, if it can be used on some of these projects you're discussing, we will come back to you on timing, whether the FEMA is going to happen faster than we can get this done, or this will be faster than getting the FEMA money. So we can talk about, lay out some projects to the board. You tell us what ones you're interested in, and we can tell you where they fall out. Whether it's already that you're going to have FEMA money here in the short term, would be worth using, or if it's going to take a little bit longer, you can make that call and tell us what direction to go in. So we can bring that back to you.
And, Mr. Chair, I've been asking the question since I got here. We opened up with a $5 million deficit on my first day, basically, and I keep every 2 weeks, these guys know I grill them on every one of these line items and saying, where can I find $500,000 this month to offset that, to make that money back? What can we do? What can we buy cheaper? I mean, we're asking the question every day, but I support the solid waste discussion. I look forward to that in August. I think that's certainly something I'm interested in examining, do a deep dive on that as well. And then what I would like your guidance on is, where do we, when we have the grant money that you talk about, grant funding, how do we budget for that? Because some of these projects that you see on here now, let's just say the Bob James Reserve, we had $20 million come in from DEP, $23 million, and the land was our half. So where does that income, how do we recognize that in our budget, or in the CDBGR money that we've put money in aside to leverage for future money? Those are all complications to this. But to your point, the cost of free money concerns me, because if you wait 5 years to do something for the government to say that they're going to pay half the bill and it costs twice as much, or they have additional burdens put on us to use that half of the money, then we didn't really get anywhere. So I'd like to see those things explored, please.
Yeah, the clarity on why I use transportation is just an example of one, and I don't have enough of a detailed information other than assumptions I'm making, and I don't want to necessarily assume. I'd rather have factual information to say, what are we doing? Because I continue to sit in this room and continue to talk about excess reserves. It's how we're paying for things. And I'm just trying to understand, because we all could agree that the transportation fund is subsidized by the general fund. We do that through GIF. We do that through a number of different ways. It's what we do. So that's just one microcosm. I haven't dissected solid waste, but I had the same conclusion when I came here. We weren't operating in the black. So when we're operating in the red, how do we absorb the red? I mean, if you keep every enterprise fund in its own operations, if they have a deficit, if that was its own business, you're going to have to somehow cure the deficit. And if you are in a company, you don't have a general fund to go to, you'd have to go borrow the money. It's just an observation, and I'd love to have even more finite information, because I just look at increased cost, and Commissioner Pendergrass is great at explaining how so many things have gone up the way they have. But that's insurance, health insurance we have for everyone here. That's workers' comp. Those are all expenses that are going through, and we're still in a situation where we have a millage rate that we haven't touched in forever. I mean, if anything, we've rolled it back. And we're probably one of the largest counties around with a millage rate, and I'm not trying to advocate for anything, but the reality is we need to think outside the box, and if we're not going to change the millage rate, we have opportunities where we have money that doesn't have a cost associated with it. I'll borrow the money. I'll take the $25 million. I can deploy it. Zero cost. And I think the five of us collectively can come up with how do we do that. Pete gives us some guidance and make sure we do that. It's just a comment that as I've gone through this, as I've had my briefings, I haven't had the opportunity to share with you what I've been told. But I'm certainly at a point where we need to cash flow ourselves through this next couple of years.
I think we all agree on the $25 million being deployed at 0%. I think
okay, great. That's comforting if I walk out with anything. That wasn't my impression yesterday of my briefing.
I think you're there now.
Okay, good. Thanks, Pete. Sorry.
So where does the grant money figure into our budget? Where all those other outside revenue sources figure into this world, please?
I don't know if I'm answering this question, but what you see here is the expense side of the budget, not the revenues. So if anything's being funded by a grant, it's in the revenue side and is offset by the cost.
Okay.
This is the cost side of the equation.
Can
Not
you
the,
also maybe provide us the funding sources for everything, enterprise funds, tax, everything, because all the different funds, permitting, everything, just so we have a basis of what the funds are to, not just expenses?
Yeah, do we talk about revenue in another meeting? I don't, this is my first time through these 7 months.
What is the FP&L? Is it 4.5, that the fee? 4.5, the FP&L fee?
it's at the electric franchise fee?
Yes.
It's at 3%. We can go up to 4.5.
Okay. That's what I thought.
That 1.5% would bring in some significant money.
Why I'm asking that is some counties and the states always look at this every year is have a charge on residents a fee to have electric vehicles because of gas tax, the loss of gas tax. And some places in the state are looking at that franchise fee replacing the gas tax revenue for road constructions because everybody's paying that fee already from the electricity at their homes and businesses. So far nothing's been done yet statewide. So I'm just curious if we're still at 3.5, 3.6, or 4.
Yeah, we're at 3%.
3%. Okay. What does that generate a year? Do you know off the top of your head or not?
Between the two electric companies, I believe about 18 to 20 million.
Right, okay. And that's just another funding source, David, that we were talking about before. There's multiple lines of funding sources.
Go from 3% to 4.5 would raise 18 million, or that's what 3% is now?
That's what 3% is. I'll get you the exact amount.
Well, roughly another 10 million if it's 20 now, so, got it. It's a lot.
Thanks, Pete.
And Commissioners, just bringing this up because you went through this in April, your transportation tiers, and we did move Burnt Store Road 4-laning from Van Buren to Charlotte County into Tier 1. You can see the cost there. We're meeting with our financial advisors to discuss that project. The funding sources, however, may be limited.
Pete, can I ask you a question about that, please?
Yeah.
So I understand we have outside experts to assist us, but if we want to talk about, obviously, Burnt Store Road, how do we fund that? I know you're going to have some input from expertise, but maybe I'll answer a question and tell me where I'm wrong. It would be a revenue stream like a GL bond, maybe, could be an alternative.
Correct.
It can certainly be from some other methodology, but again, the users that use Burnt Store Road wouldn't necessarily be paying for Burnt Store Road if we did a GO bond.
Correct.
So we advanced something, and I'm all for Burnt Store Road doing it. I just look at the next 2 pages and come up with $2 billion odd, and I know we're out of revenue streams because we have a balance sheet that only has so much capacity, and we have so many different, whether it's solid waste or utilities or roads. I don't know how we're going to do what we're going to do. We've grown dramatically here in just the 20 years I've been here, and we still have what's in front of us, and this gives me nightmares. I don't know how we're paying for it.
That's why some areas have done the toll roads, they've done other type of bonding or dedicated funding taxes for 2 years or something like that to dedicate funding for certain projects and stuff. But that's why you see the areas, those larger areas, they do the toll roads. It's unfortunate, but that pays for the sources.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, I think
436 to 517, 417.
My point, Commissioners, I think we're at the point where we're going to have to look outside the box and some things that we haven't considered, because to David's point, these projects are only going up in cost. these dollar amounts, since I've been here, has increased dramatically. I don't think they're gonna get any cheaper. So we're gonna have to somehow have a conversation that's uncomfortable about how do we think outside the box. And listen, we're all in the same area, we all have the same conservative principles, but if this information doesn't give us some indication that we at least have to have a conversation, I don't know what does.
I can't agree with you more. But a couple of things. I'm concerned, like the Cape Coral Bridge, you say the tolls, right? I mean, when you actually hit home with me with the $6 tolls on Sanibel, right? It's been the same thing for 15, 20 years. You can't have the same revenue for what $6 was a big deal back then, right? But maybe it would have inflation adjusted to $10 now. Right? And I think those things are worth looking at. I mean, it's just the way life is. We can't control the economy as a whole, but we got to keep things in balance. But I'm concerned that Cape Coral tolls aren't going to be $10. By the time this would be over, I mean. But one thing on the slide, Pete, I think the Midpoint Bridge got pushed back, in my opinion, behind the burnt store priorities. We didn't need as much Midpoint Bridge work, or we were looking at other strategies. So we didn't have money for any of them, so it probably doesn't matter what order we put them in at the moment. But it was like 9, 12, 10 would be the order of this slide in what we talked about last time.
Correct. 10 is still just on there because the discussion was we would come back with alternatives, and we believe those alternatives will be much cheaper. So we left it there, and we brought Burnt Store into Tier 1, knowing that we had to come back and have a discussion with the board about potential revenue opportunities to fund that road.
And I still have a hard time. I want to see what the Burnt Store work looks like here. I still can't. It just doesn't scale to $300 million compared to Alico Road or some of these other larger projects. I don't. When I look at it, the last major bridge you got to go over is at Gator Slough, and everything else is within 2 or 3 feet of grade. The rest of the 5 miles, I don't know how 5 miles of road can cost $60 million a mile. Just when you drive out there, and don't we already own most of the right of way?
Yes, but I believe our goal would be when we come back to talk about the alternatives with Burnt Store, we were also going to talk about the cost associated with the road itself. But I believe Rob, Rob, are you going to tell us something? Maybe? It's anybody's guess.
The password is.
So the actual cost of Burnt Store Road in today dollars is in the $180 million range. What the number that you see here on the chart represents is our projected build year costs. So we haven't changed the actual build year because we don't have the revenue stream to actually build it. So we're still projecting it out, I believe, 7 years for construction, 7 to 8 years. So that's what that additional $100 million basically amounts to.
So Kevin's point,
I'm just looking. I'm looking at some of these things, and again, maybe I have, maybe as a result of the tragedy of my family, I've been up in the Northeast too much. But I'm not aware of. I mean, Sanibel's tolls is 18 years since we adjusted that. Can I ask, since I wasn't here, what was the Cape Coral toll before it was $1 or $2? Okay, and how long ago was that adjusted? How long has the dollar been in place? 30 years?
Yeah, 1993.
Okay, so help me out. What is still at 1993's prices?
Sample Bridge. They don't want us coming across the island, They don't want us to come across.
But the reality is, and this is where I love living here, but I go back to New Jersey and been back there, and in a week, I run up hundreds of dollars of toll costs. Hundreds. And we're going to have a conversation, and commissioners, we're all going to get beat up over raising something that we haven't touched in 34 years? Okay.
I think we're having this conversation, but I think we also need to be cognizant of, I watch the news, I listen to my neighbors in Cape Coral, and right now they're tremendously upset over even just a $4 increase
Yeah.
on their utility bill. And so, I mean, people are very sensitive in this economy, in this environment, to any kind of increases right now, and we gotta keep that in mind. I do believe that people will buy something if they feel like it's going to provide them value, right? And they would pay for something maybe if they felt like it could provide them value. So if we could design a program that said these very important projects that would alleviate the traffic congestion that we all hate very much and complain about every single day could be paid for through a very small, half penny sales tax or something like that. And I don't even like saying the word out loud, right? But people will buy something if you can show them there is an improvement and a value to their life for it. But there's a lot of work that would need to be done before you design that program in order to get them to sign up and say, yes, I would pay for
The first
it.
step in doing a program is to have a conversation to see what that might look like.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate where we are. But the reality is we have significant growth we've gone through. We have significant issues. And listen, I've been in government for a while. The constituent never wants to have anything increased. But the reality is you can't have 1993's prices and have us continue to operate with the demand we do, because what is happening is Sanibel, went and said, we're going to charge $6 to people to pay cash. So like all the transponders, whatever, they seem to be getting the discount, but the user is paying for that. At Cape Coral, we go from $1 to $2, so the user pays $1 more. Is that adequate enough? Absolutely not. And all I'm saying is, where are our deficiencies? And where are they, and how do we identify those? And that's what I'm looking forward to, because to your point, I think every constituent would certainly be very apprehensive for us to raise anything. But if you can demonstrate, here's our plan, and here's the benefits you're going to receive from it, it's at least worthy of a conversation. We may not go to the point of passing it, but it's a conversation we have to have, gentlemen.
I would agree with you, and if I might add, again, nobody wants their fees to go up, but nobody wants their level of service to go down either, right? So that strikes a balance, right? I think it's also important that as we have these discussions, that we demonstrate to the public that we are operating with efficiency and waste, fraud, and abuse processes and procedures on a daily and weekly basis to make sure they know we're not adding a fee before we cut the fat somewhere else, right? They don't want to have waste government spending, as gets talked about in the news every day, and then say we raised your prices too, right? We have to make sure that we're being effective with the money we do have before we ask for the new revenue offset.
Kudos
right?
to
Make sure we're doing both.
I've been here a dozen years. You guys have done a great job, but the reality is we have something staring us in the face. And none of the figures look like they're going to get any better. So we need to have a conversation. And today's not the day, but listen, it's probably political suicide for me to be talking the way I am. But it's the reality we're dealing with. And the one thing before we close is I certainly do not want to balance this budget on any of the employees here, on any of their backs. No way. It's 5%, we don't have it, we're giving. That's my vote. I want to see a budget with a 5% increase for our staff. That's my 2 cents, and nobody has to comment. That's what I believe we need to do. Because we have a deficit. Pete, the $13 million deficit, does it have a 5% raise in there?
No.
So then what would the deficit then be?
Well, Commissioners, I think on the 17th we can give you a little better picture, because we're comparing our projected revenues, not only what we got in the property tax, but our other revenues to the submitted budgets at this point. So I'd prefer to hold off on that answer until we get to the 17th.
But it's fair to say that it's going to be greater than 13?
I don't know. I don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that yet.
Okay. Then I'll hold back on my comment.
Can we get a snapshot of what 4, 5, 6, 7% increase would be for all the constitutionals? Because I know we haven't got the sheriff's budget yet, what that number is also? for 4, 5, 6%, so we can see what the total breakdown is? Thank you.
Yeah, we can get you that.
I think I did see an email this week that the clerk's budget came in 4.7% under last year's budget. So I'd like to see that trend continue.
Use some of that money then, right?
Congratulations.
Thank you for that.
Thank you to the clerk. Yeah, absolutely. Do we have, I certainly want to, I certainly and have always supported raises for the employees, want to continue to do that. Do we have any visibility to what the private sector and the rest of the market is doing as for raises right now? Are they still at 5% or are they down at 2%? Because I'm hearing a lot more from regular businesses that they see what the county's given and they're not able to do that in their private sector businesses, and the state's doing like 2%. So I mean, I want to compensate our folks very well. I just, I think we also need to be cognizant of what else everybody else is
The
doing.
municipalities too. The reality is the municipalities and the counties always compete with each other, and other counties, Charlotte and Collier, always compete with that for.
I mean,
we want to treat employees and we want to compensate our employees because they're our neighbors and our residents, but,
We just talked about how we're $13 million with a deficit right now. I want to, before we commit to anything, we got to get all the information, that's all.
And I understand your points, and certainly as someone that run businesses for the last 3 decades, you keep staff through the difficult times. And listen, I've governed long enough to remember when I was at Sanibel, we had 6 years of 0% increases. And I've always been big on the pendulum has to swing both ways. So when we swing it one way, and you go 6 years without a raise, at 3%, that's 18%.
I would like to.
And then it's compounded.
Yeah.
So the 18% might be 25%. And if you use 5%, and it's 30%, compounded might be 50%.
And
We
certainly,
still, and to me, my philosophy, just to finish the sentence, is I basically said the pendulum has to swing both ways. And I don't think we're at a point where we can't continue the progression we've made to make up for the deficiencies that we created.
I don't have any problem with what you've said at all. I do want to point out, though, that I've been here for 12 years and we have done a raise every year for all 12 years that we've been here. I don't see any reason why we won't do something this year as well. I don't want people to get, it's funny. For 12 years, we've given people raises, and many times when I go talk to a work group, though, in person, they'll still remind us of something that happened more than 12 years ago.
2008.
And I know, and I'm like, I wasn't even on the board when that happened, and so every year I've been here, every year Commissioner Pendergrass has been here, I think we've given increases to the employees, and I hope that we've earned, their trust, that we're going to continue to take care of them and compensate them well, so.
And Brian, the only reason I bring it up is I went through the painful period of having to tell people no. Gave them 0. We didn't have any other way to balance the budget. It was sliding down. Commissioner Pendergrass was here with Commissioner Kiker, and we used millage rate from 2020. I mean, we did what we had to do. And I didn't like doing it, but I don't forget it. And that's my whole point. And it's just something that, looking at the deficit that we have, at least in my synopsis, the $13 million doesn't have any dollar amount in it. And Commissioner Pendergrass is right, let's look at it 4, 5, and 6. But I wouldn't mind, at least since the door is open and I opened it, is maybe asking the county attorney just to understand what options we might potentially have, or how does even a sales tax, I don't even know if it's within our preview. I don't know. Can you help me out with some insight? Been thrown around, but I've never understood it.
By and large, your ability to levy taxes is governed by state law. You can only levy taxes that the legislature allows you to levy. One of the tools in the toolbox is the infrastructure sales tax. That is done by county ordinance, that is then put to voter referendum. Somewhat recently, I believe in the past 2 to 3 years, the legislature said such referendums have to take place on a general election ballot. So that would mean 26 at the earliest, which is okay, because as Commissioner Hammond pointed out, you have to build this as a program. And anyone,
Build trust.
any of these successful referendums that I've witnessed has always been a definitive time, a definitive project list, and a definitive cost. And then you take that out and you market that, and you build the trust, and that's how you get the affirmative vote. You think back to the school board.
10-year.
That's what the school board basically did. But you have that option. You have that tool in the toolbox already under the local infrastructure sales tax. That can be 0.5% or 1 full percent. Now, you do have to share that with the municipalities on a population-based scale. But if the board's interested, we can come back with a more definitive presentation as to procedure and potential revenue. If that's what the board wishes.
Just to have it on the plate.
Well, that's kind of why I brought it up. I'm just trying to look at least a snapshot of what that looks like. Nothing else.
And there may be other funding alternatives that we could take a look at if the board would desire.
We already said that. Multiple.
I think it's something we need to at least explore.
I'm definitely not committing to sending it to the ballot, but I mean,
I'm not either.
You gotta look at, you gotta have the conversation, before you say no to something. So, there you go.
I'm not lobbying, I just want to get another.
Yeah.
All right, Pete will work with your office and put something together.
You have enough direction?
I'm going to go over it in a second.
Okay.
You know, stuff on your list on that is?
I'm working on it.
You need another sheet of paper?
I was going to say, I got tons of it.
All right, good conversation, commissioners. And then I alluded to this earlier, but with all this said, we still would like to wait until after year end to appropriate general fund CIP projects, and then we'll continue to give you regular updates of priority unfunded projects.
Thanks, Pete.
One last, if I could, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Real quick on the infrastructure sales tax. Allowable uses, transportation, stormwater, and public safety. So those are your three large generic categories that you can spend the revenue raised for. And I know the board in the past has talked about stormwater as well. So we'll put together a full.
I'm not ready to pull the lever, but I certainly want to understand the information. And I'm far from pulling the lever, but I want to understand what I want to understand. And right now, listen, I've been gone for a month, but I looked at the tier projects, and it's frightening. Mr. County Manager, you want to summarize what you're going to do for us?
I'm certainly going to try.
I appreciate it.
The material recovery facility, we're going to have to come back to you by the 17th, so you can give us a decision, because currently we're under design and we have an RFP out for equipment, so we would need a decision sooner than later on what you would prefer us to do. So we'll start briefing. Chris and Rebecca will start briefing each of you, and then we'll be prepared to have a discussion on the 17th. The other item is we are going to bring back the amount of general fund dollars used to subsidize projects over the last 5 years. $25 million loan. We're going to use it for revenue replacement and work out a plan to repay over the 7-year period. We'll kind of lay out when the repayments will start, or when we'll start sinking fund dollars in the fund to repay. We'll also provide what the 25 can be spent on. We'll kind of expand upon what the operational can be. If for some reason it'll allow us to do some of those projects that fall under the discussion that Commissioner Hammond had regarding FEMA projects, we'll also lay out the timing on the FEMA projects versus the timing on using this fund. And you can give us direction on how you want us to move forward. We'll also provide those projects of most interest to the board as well. Obviously, we got a ton of them. Some of them are going to take longer than the others. We will also look at, I'm not saying we're doing this, but we'll provide information on what the increase potentially could be on the electric franchise fee. We will also explore the idea of infrastructure sales tax and provide some information, additional information for the board.
And can we just make sure we cover any enterprise funds where we have not necessarily indexed, where you might feel that we may not necessarily be running it at a break even?
Okay.
Is that a fair?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, did we cover the price increase or price index on tolls, or like you said, inflationary, is that what you just covered?
I appreciate everyone's attendance. I think with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.